Hi, I'm Gabrielle Hoyt, the literary manager of Roundhouse Theater, and I'm hosting the weekly series Playwrights on Plays, which is part of the Roundhouse at Your House digital programming, fully funded by new contributions from the Roundhouse Board of Trustees. Every Thursday at 7 p.m., I'll spend an hour interviewing a different Roundhouse-affiliated theater maker about their work, their career, and a play that has influenced and inspired them. We'll also include time in those interviews for your questions, which, if you're watching live, you can type into the chat window on your screen. Each play we discuss is already free online for you to experience so that you can continue to engage with theater from your home throughout the week. Tonight, I'm so happy to welcome Roundhouse Theater Commission playwright Tim J. Lord. Tim is the inaugural recipient of the Apothe Lark Fellowship and was a Jerome Fellow at the Playwrights Center in Minneapolis. His work has been developed at institutions like the Public Theater, the Kennedy Center, and Actors Theater of Louisville, and he was recently a writer-in-residence at the Orchard Project. His play, We Declare You a Terrorist, is slated for inclusion in Roundhouse's next season, and he's taught extensively for Roundhouse as well. He's also one of the playwrights we've commissioned for our brand new web series, Homebound, about life in the nation's capital during a pandemic. I'm thrilled to have him here this evening to talk about all of the above. Welcome, Tim.
Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
I did not, of course, mention in your formal intro that you also have the important title of Dad of Henry.
Dad of Henry, correct, yeah.
Henry, of course, being Tim's perfect and adorable dog, whom I have been honored to meet and care for at times.
Yeah, he doesn't care to watch things on screen, so he's somewhere,
I understand. I would see him being a screen-free kind of guy. He's better than we are.
Yeah, we've decided that his whole thing is like, if you can't pet me, you're not real. So.
I am at the moment not real. Wow, that's
exactly. It's sad because he loves you. We know he loves you. So.
Tim, apart from lots of quality time with Henry, the most important thing, I'd love to hear a little bit about what your life looks like right now.
Yeah, it's a little crazy, It's like, I mean, at the moment, things are basically fine. We've got a roof over our heads. My wife still has her job. In the spectrum of playwrights you've had on this series so far, I feel like they sort of range from working on Broadway and Tony Award winning to just really getting started, and I'm at that very just getting started professionally sort of thing, at the end of things. So, so my first few weeks were spent trying to get onto unemployment, first via Maryland, and then eventually I got onto DC's unemployment since I've worked in both places. So yes, for me, it was really, the beginning of this was really about God, how do I actually continue to contribute, because the DC region is very expensive, and I was one of these people who was incredibly grateful when the federal unemployment package was passed via the CARES Act, and so I'm actually like, oh, okay, now. Everything is still a little bit crazy, but at least I can sort of focus a bit more on doing other things as well. So keeping the house in order, doing lots of baking.
I was gonna say I've heard of pies.
Yeah, lots of cooking and baking, and and be really for me once starting to get a rhythm of things, I could sort of settle back in and start thinking about actually writing again.
So before we do go to writing, I do have to ask, favorite quarantine recipe thus far?
Oh God, I made I'm new to the bread baking. I started off as a pie maker. I come from a long tradition of excellent pie makers, so I learned from my mother, who learned from her mother, and so on, going back many generations. So I've been doing that I've been making pies for a long time, but I've been wanting to get into more bread making, and having more time on my hands, I've finally been able to really kind of delve into that. And I was like, this is not the same as other baking. It's like I was following the recipe and nothing is happening the way it's supposed to, even though I think I have all the right things. But I'm learning as I'm going along. And then finally, the Cook's Illustrated 24-hour sourdough recipe. I made this, and for the first time, I was like, "This is bread, and it tastes like sourdough bread, and it looks like sourdough bread that you would buy in a store or bakery or whatever."
Awesome.
And that was very it was very satisfying.
I'm very happy to hear that you are tapping into the family ancestral recipes.
Oh, yeah.
My grandmother, who watches this program religiously, so hi, Baba, often encourages me to tap into the family tradition of Google it. So,
Yeah.
so Tim, what are you working on these days?
Well, so I was supposed to be doing a writing residency at the William Inge Theatre Festival. That was what was going to happen before everything stopped, basically. So I would have been at William Inge's boyhood home in Independence, Kansas, for 6 weeks, and I'd had like a whole sort of list of things that I wanted to touch on while I was there. So one of the plays I'm working on is a play that I began 2 years ago and was doing a big workshop of like a year ago, right this time, a play called On Every Link a Heart Does Dangle, or Ode, which I play, and it's like I was able to get together like a Zoom reading with some friends of mine.
Nice.
I could just hear that again and start thinking about coming back to that in this moment. Though most of my creative work right now is on a brand new play that I started at the Orchard Project last year called The Hard Price, which is, the simple version is it's a radical reimagining of the Oresteia, but set in like a rural small town in North Dakota towards during like the surge in the Iraq War. It's like 2010 as present day. It jumps around in time a bit. And that's been the big creative focus on my end, right, in terms of like where I'm spending most of my time, as well as then getting ready for like my Homebound episode, which is coming up very soon.
Rapidly approaching, yeah. I'll talk more about some of your specific plays in just a bit, but I will say that Greek adaptation and the kind of mashup of Greek narrative and modern themes that we'll discuss later in Chuck Me is also something that you have done with multiple different Greek myths. So I'm excited to hear more from you about that. Before we get off the topic of kind of the current moment, though, I'm curious, and it's been interesting hearing different answers from so many different playwrights at this point. What does being an artist look like or mean for you right now? And how has that changed in the past couple of months?
It's a really hard time, I think, in a lot of ways. I hear people say like, oh well, this is like, and maybe it's largely joking, and I hear this around, like people say, God, this is what writers do all the time, right? We just we isolate ourselves from society and we write. But I don't know, like it's actually been very hard for me, I think, because I have so many friends who work in the theater, and seeing like how like people are, they're out of work, or they are like they just simply don't know what's coming, right? Like what's in the future for any of them, and I'm following like what's going on with theaters across the country at this point. Oregon Shakespeare Festival was originally just canceling for the summer. Now they've canceled their entire season. The Gothic is canceling until March of next year. It's like, so there's really this, like, when I talk to my friends about making theater, there's this whole thing of like, is it going to be like, how long is this going to be? I feel like when this began, we were all kind of thinking like, oh, well, the CDC says we all have to just stop for 8 weeks or whatever it was. We're now on week 9 since that order came down, and people are really starting to kind of look at the future and saying like, I don't know when this starts again. I don't know when we're able to come back together again, And the nature of the American theater in particular is that it is not nimble, so like the idea of the theater trying to find new ways. I know that theater wants to find new ways to operate in this moment, but the ability for a lot of these bigger institutions that have the resources to do that, it's questionable right now. I think and that's not to like a point of finger, criticize anyone. That's just the nature of the beast as it is here, so. So yeah, it's a little troubling, right? And it's like I myself, like speaking for myself, then have had to rely on what I've always had to rely on, which is like, I don't know where the next paycheck's coming. I don't know where the next job's coming. I have to find my own way to care about this and to create what I'm creating. And I also, and then when I think of like how I'm responding to the moment. I'm sure like it's filtering in, and I'm sure it will filter out at some point into some sort of future creative work. But I'm definitely someone who, as I'm creating, when I'm creating, like I'm taking stuff in from the outside world, and it will filter through me, and eventually it will come out some other way. But at some point after this, I think.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting for you writing your Homebound episode. For those who have not been lucky enough to watch any of Homebound yet, I will say that it is a Roundhouse Theater originally produced web series about life during the pandemic in the nation's capital, written in 10 episode chunks by, written as 10-minute episodes by 10 different playwrights. So we're a little under halfway through now, and Tim, your episode is coming up. So I wonder if you even started to conceive of actually needing to process some of what's going on through art.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely the exception to the rule, I think, because it is this moment of a group of artists coming together and saying, well, let's do this. Let's actually figure out how to create something in the moment that can respond to this moment.
Yeah.
And that's actually been really exciting, I think, because like Roundhouse did a fantastic job, I think, of getting a really wide array of writers in terms of their backgrounds and their talents and their styles. Really just getting this a very diverse group of people together to create this thing, and sort of from the first episode up to mine, which is episode 6, we'll have seen the two central characters, Mabood and Craig. We'll see them each, 5 times, I guess, but separately, right? So my episode 6, is the first time that we've seen the two of them together.
Right. Yes. It's exciting.
Yeah, and so it's this meeting point. I'm sort of I was actually talking to one of the other playwrights the other day just about thoughts that we were having, and I was realizing Craig has been on one arc, and Mabood has been on another arc, and I'm actually finding that middle point.
Yeah.
And I have to kind of figure out what is that thing that they're meeting at this particular point, and what is it where have they been, and how is that can propel them on towards the end. I think we won't see them together again until the final episode, I believe. So, spoiler alert. But it's and that actually has been really interesting. So on Tuesday of this past week, actually got to talk with Craig and with Mabood and the artistic staff, just throwing some ideas around, just kind of taking the temperature of where we've been. I was up to date on everything that had come prior to that, and so that is one of those wonderful ways in which the people are finding to respond to a thing in the moment,
Yeah.
And to find ways to sort of channel what's going on around us into this piece of
And I think to come together and do some group process, not asking any one person to go off and create themselves, but there's still a sense of congregation, I think, even in the midst of this social separation. Also, credit where credit is due, that not long at all after our artistic director, Ryan Roulette, began to conceive of this project and share the idea with the artistic staff, we looped you in, given your close relationship with the theater, to advise us on what made sense in terms of formatting. So it must also be so exciting to see the idea that we discussed kind of coming to fruition now.
Yeah, definitely. And it is nice to have, it is nice to have a thing to do, like you were charged with doing this, and so because so often in theater in general, when especially as a playwright, you create this play and you may spend years working on it and you don't know if it will ever see the light of day. So to have Ryan and Roundhouse come in and say we're doing this now, this is a chance to employ local artists and to do a thing that is in the moment, and you're getting paid for it. And it is getting produced no matter what, come hell or high water, and to go forth. So I had that meeting Tuesday, and instantly ideas started popping, and started sketching things out yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was nice to have that energy, that sort of I do a lot of I often have to inspire myself to do the work, but it's nice when someone else sort of comes along and gives you a little boost, right? help.
It's been interesting. I think, again, as you said, American theater is not known for its nimbleness. And of course, there are, I think, pros and cons to any kind of knee-jerk reaction to a crisis like this. But I think something that's been interesting has been seeing all these different institutions finding new and very quick ways to continue engaging with artists and audiences, creating art, or even, entirely new institutions like the Trickle Up, which our guest Rachel Shafkin mentioned a couple episodes back, figuring out different ways to continue creating content very, very quickly in a way that we as theater artists aren't used to.
Yeah, and it's it sucks that it took an actual plague to sort of inspire some of these conversations, but I am seeing some positive things coming out of it. You mentioned my drone fellowship, which is administered at the Playwrights Center, and the Playwrights Center very quickly found ways that they could start putting all of their services online, because they provide services and support for playwrights actually around the globe at this point, and finding just simple things like oh, hey, we can do weekly office hours, here's a recurring Zoom meeting, show up, talk about whatever you need to talk about, and we're here, we didn't have that before, right? So and it's the Playwright Center is one of these places that has created a fantastic just community of writers and artists. And as someone who doesn't but it's based in Minneapolis, and as someone who's not in Minneapolis, I miss that, and so it's been nice to be able to actually reconnect with them, if I want to just show up on a Thursday and just hey Jeremy,
so it's actually more accessible.
Yeah, exactly. And Jeremy was saying too, he's been they've been thinking about it for themselves, and he's been talking to other artistic leaders about how we can actually use some of this technology. It's not been the best. I mean, my experience anyways is watching a reading is not necessarily the most engaging experience, but in terms of the ways that you're actually able to reach into communities and bring conversation to them and bring ideas and talks and classes to communities that maybe have been more underrepresented because of their proximity or whatever, it's actually something that people are starting to consider. So he mentioned the fact that Perseverance Theater in Juneau, Alaska is really we're not just Juneau's theater, we're the State Theater of Alaska, and so we should really be finding ways to use this technology to get into rural communities, to bring theater to these various rural communities that are all around us, because Juneau is literally on an island. You can't drive there, so you have to get on a boat or fly or whatever. I don't know how they get around. It's all theory, but yeah, it's. Yeah, I think that's actually one of these moments where where people are starting to think, trying to think creatively about how to, how to thrive in the moment, and how to continue to connect with people, despite the fact that we're not actually physically able to do so.
Yeah. So Tim, let's turn to you as a playwright, your work, and you as an artist. For those who haven't been lucky enough to become familiar with your work, and hopefully Roundhouse Theater will be changing that very soon when we are all back together. Can you give us a sense of the kind of plays that you tend to write?
Yeah, so I write. I totally practiced this before, and now it's gone right out of my head. No, I tend to write. I tend to write plays about outsiders. I tend to write plays that are set in the Midwest, that are sort of big and sweeping in their scope, but personal in the way that that an audience is allowed to enter them. So big ideas, big landscapes, but very personal relationships that bring the audience into that world. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in how people create the places that they live in, and how those places in turn create the people that live there, and that relationship between landscape and character. I'm very interested in just in these, I don't know, in political stories ultimately too. I found myself unable to avoid any sort of political topic in my plays. I think pretty much for 20 years or so now. My early ones were probably a little bit more esoteric and not as overtly political. But yeah, I mean, but big, and I'm very interested in taking mythic themes and finding ways to bring those into a contemporary world, resetting them in a contemporary world.
So I do want to focus in on those plays that deal with mythic themes a little bit because they intersect so well with Chuck Me. But before we do that, your play, We Declare You a Terrorist, which Roundhouse has given you a finishing commission for, which we will do the world premiere of, it is a bit different. And I wonder if you can give a little bit of a teaser for when audiences return and we get to see that amazing work.
Yeah, it is a bit of an outlier in terms of like the plays that I tend to write.
In some ways.
In some ways, yeah. No, it's not set in the Midwest. It's set in Russia. There's no Greek basis to it. Whatever. I'll start saying what it's not about. I'll say what it is about. The play is based around the Moscow theater siege in 2002, when 40 Chechens stormed a theater in the heart of Moscow and took around 800 people hostage. And the siege went on for, I think, like 57 hours. It ended when post-Soviet, when Russian special forces were able to storm the theater. They killed all of the Chechens. And at first, it seemed like it was this massive success, like that the Chechens were dead, the hostages were safe, and then like as news reports started trickling in over the following hours, it's like hostages are dying, and they're like and the numbers went up and up, and like there's this being like Russia in the early days of Putin, no one really knows exactly how many people died, maybe as much as 200. That's the historical event that it's based on. The other piece of the play that's based in history is. One of the people who was held hostage during that was the guy who wrote and produced the play that was being performed. Mm-hmm. And over the course, he was one of the hostages. And over the course of the crisis, he started a conversation. About half the Chechens were women who were scattered through the audience and had bombs strapped to their bodies. The idea being that if special forces came in, they would be able to blow themselves up and kill everybody before they could be rescued. He started up a conversation with one of these women. He said, like in interviews, he said, my idea was maybe I could stop her from setting off her bomb. But over the course of these several days, at least I got the sense from interviews that maybe there was a bit of a connection that was made there. And I've heard it in other sources too, that other hostages were talking to the women who were close to them, and there were connections being made. And a lot of those people were left a bit more sympathetic, maybe at least to the women who were involved. And so that's all the historical basis for the play. I got really interested in that idea and like, what does that mean? And so I created a fictional version of that character, the writer, sort of like what happens to him after the fact. And so the play then bounces back and forth between these two different timelines. Yeah. So there's him in the theater talking to this woman and one of the other hostages. And then there's him a year later, and what's happened to them, this is not giving anything away because this is where the play starts. But basically, he has been taken into custody by the FSB, which is the KGB successor, and is being interrogated because they believe that he has perhaps now become sympathetic to the Chechens' cause and is perhaps himself become a terrorist. Yeah. And so that's the basis of the play.
I was thinking about this play today in anticipation of talking to you and thinking about how it's so amazing, I think, that you've created this electrifying kind of geopolitical thriller, but that it's also so much about whether art has any power, whether we as artists can change the world, especially in the midst of crises. It felt to me to be asking questions that felt really relevant, given that we're in the midst of figuring out again what art means during a global crisis.
Yeah. I started writing that play during George W. Bush's presidency, and it was very much. I was living in this moment where I was very angry about what was going on. Like in terms of like it felt like we'd started this war in Iraq, the second war in Iraq. And there was just, there was clear that there was no plan for what to do after the fact, right? So I was living with that, like, just, anger and trying to figure out, like, what would I do with that? Meanwhile, I knew that I wanted to write about this other thing entirely, and I was having a hard time getting into it. And so I started doing what I do, and especially when I don't necessarily know where, like, the world or what it is exactly, but like I did research. which led me to the writings of Anna Polakowska, who was a journalist who wrote for Novaya Gazeta, a very smaller and left-wing but newspaper that still exists, but was always sort of pushed to the side in terms of their opinions and their visibility. But she was one of the few people in 2002 actually writing about what was going on in Chechnya and the ways in which the Russian army was committing genocide in Chechnya. And in this book that she wrote, A Small Corner of Hell, Dispatches from Chechnya, I think it's the full title. But it's a hard book to read. Some of the stuff she's talking about is really difficult stuff to process. And I came out of that being like, God, I can't write a play about this. I should be out in the streets protesting or something, But I kind of ran up against this thing myself. Was like I'm not a good politician. I get too angry. If I'm trying to make a point about something that has affected me personally, I can't tamp that down, So it really kind of became this process of me sort of putting myself into that, I guess, the writer's footstep, shoes rather, and what do you do, right? Like when you're actually confronted with this stuff, what do you do? How do you do it? And is there a possibility for art, for theater, whatever, to bridge some of these chasms that seem unbridgeable? Yeah. And so I think that really became the heart of the play, and it was when I was able to sort of to personalize that and find those less historical, less political ways into the play that actually allowed me to be able to write it, I think. So
as we mentioned, in addition to We Declare You a Terrorist, many of your plays also are adaptations. Mm-hmm. You might call them remixes, yeah. But they take on the subjects of Greek tragedies. Mm-hmm. One you mentioned, Ode, deals, and I think some of your others deal with the cursed family of Oedipus Rex, mm-hmm. and many of the other characters within that trilogy of plays by Sophocles. And you are also taking on the Oresteia, originally mm-hmm. By Aeschylus, which deals with Agamemnon and his family in and around and after the Trojan War. Mm-hmm. Why? What attracts you to taking these stories as source material? I have a hard time answering this question because it feels, for some reason, it feels like something that's been with me for such a long time. We had this box in our apartment that had somehow completely gone unpacked, and with extra time in our hands to clean, I was like, oh, what's in this box? And I pulled out is it D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths? Yes, it is. It's this children's version of Greek myths with all. I'm gonna do something I've never done and go. You're gonna pull it, aren't you? I'll cover it. I'll cover it. What I'm doing is I'm grabbing my 2 copies of D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths. This the new one, and then this one that my mother was given when she was a child.
Oh my goodness! I had the more colorful one that you had. But yeah, I found it and I was like, oh my God, I have not seen this in forever. And so it's been there with me for a long time, right? Like this idea of this other world and stuff. And but I think I keep coming back to them because while there is this mythic world and there is history there that is foreign to us, it's the stories that they're dealing with are really primal versions of the human experience. Mm-hmm. I look at a play like Iphigenia, the original Euripides play Iphigenia at Aulis, and it's it really is a play about the awful things that we can do to our family and how that spreads outward into the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think because there's ways in which that they were just dealing with these in very primeval ways, that I don't know, they sing to me a bit, and they literally these plays were written basically long poems, parts of which were sung, and a lot of my writing tends towards the poetic, mm-hmm. and so there's something that's there's a connection there across the ages or whatever. That said, I look at those stories and I can recognize that they are also speaking to a very specific audience, and so certain things that would have played with with like the contemporary Athenian audience of the time will not play across ages to our own time. And so like, so how do you like, I mean, I describe it as sort of like going into these plays, tearing them apart, saying like identifying sort of each piece, like, well, what is this? Why is it here? Does it work right now? Can it be made to work? And if it can't, then toss it, you know?
Yeah.
And so I started pulling them all back together, and then I ultimately put them into a world that is more recognizable to, I think, to a contemporary American audience.
On that exact note,
Yeah.
something else that I think is characteristic, especially of your adaptations, and you've mentioned it, is their setting in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And you write in this style, I think I've described it to you before as kind of Midwestern Gothic. Yeah. Instead of Southern Gothic. But I'd love to hear more about that, in that you're not writing plays that, you know, I'd consider realism. Yeah. That is, you're not trying to put an exact slice of life on, you know, from the Midwest on stage at Roundhouse Theater or wherever. You're doing something different. And I wonder if you could speak specifically to that interest in portraying the Midwest, and then that preoccupation with the mythic and the poetic and the unreal.
Yeah, I mean, well, so it begins with the fact that that's where I'm from, right? So I was born and raised in Missouri, in both Kansas City for like until I was about 10, and in St. Louis, where my parents grew up, from the time I was 10 onward. And I don't know, like I always, from the time I started writing, I was aware of the fact that I actually wanted to be writing about whatever that experience was. I mean, I feel like I looked at the world around me and I was not seeing that story portrayed. You know, like watching TV as a kid. You know, like maybe it's like suburban, like sort of a generic, more suburban setting or whatever. But you know, it's like a lot of East Coast, a lot of West Coast stories. There's not a lot of stories about like what's going on in the middle of the country, and that's a huge slice of the country, both like, you know, geographically and, you know, population wise. And so and that was also like it was my response to that very early a piece of advice that came from my first teachers was like, you know, write what you know, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, but it was something that I wanted to do, and like I realized at first actually that I didn't know how to do it. I think probably because I was in it. And it wasn't until I left, I got a job at Trinity Rep Theater in Providence, Rhode Island, when I was about 25. And so it was my first time really leaving the Midwest. And I finally found myself able, I think that there was that distance allowing me to be able to like actually start to kind of decode what that was and figure out how to turn that into a play. And yeah, like, but I don't do, I'm not like, I stay pretty far away from like hardcore naturalism. And I think that's why is that? I think it's because like it's something about the way that I just like I come at the world. Like, I mean, when I talk about that those relationships between place and character and people, and like there is a bit of a spiritual quality to it, I guess, for me, you know, like it is because it is this relationship that is kind of undefinable, and it is invisible in many ways, but like you feel it, you know, like, I mean, like I always describe it like in when you are in the Midwest, like in the summertime before a massive storm, you feel that storm coming before it hits you. I mean, like I remember like a very specific incident when I was in undergrad. I also went to undergrad in Illinois, and there was this one day, like everyone on campus was just pissed. Like everyone was having a terrible day, and I couldn't explain it. You know, like I could feel my whole body just like, you know, getting tight, and like I couldn't explain it. And then that night was just this massive thunderstorm that exploded literally over the campus. Like I was looking out a window and I saw lightning strike 3 times, like on a diagonal across the campus. And then the rain poured down, and this cool wind came in after it, and the storm blew on, and all of a sudden everyone just felt like, oh, I'm fine now. You know, like that's a real thing, you know, like, and it makes sense, right? There's barometric pressure. It is literally like the atmosphere is literally pushing down on you. So we all felt like we were being crushed because we actually in a way were. And so like, how do you put that into a naturalistic play? And I think the answer is I can't. Yeah. And so it becomes, I also talk about the fact like the the setting of my plays is always the unspoken character that is part of the play. Like there's like where that play set, where my plays are set is always very specific place. I never set it like in a generic apartment or whatever, or like any town. Like no, never. It is a specific town that you can point to on a map, even if it's a fictionalized town. You can I can still show you where it exists. And yeah, like that's, and so I think the way that I end up incorporating all that is through this more poetic language and through a world that can be slightly more fantastic, because I feel like it's that one of the interviews here, someone said like that whole thing of like a fictional thing can be more true than a fact or something like that. Like
I think it was Charlie Yvonne Simpson.
Yeah, like that. Like it's like, yes, exactly, right. Like when you're trying to create the emotional truth of something, that is just as true as the factual truth of a thing.
So speaking of fantasy, speaking of poetry, let's talk about Chuck Me and IPHIGENIA 2.0. So first, before we even get to that play, you were the second playwright in 2 weeks to want to discuss his work. The first being Sarah Rule, who talked about Big Love last week. I'm curious, just right off the bat, why you think this playwright is so influential, especially to other artists.
I would say for one reason, it's because he when Chuck takes a play, I mean, whatever it is, whether it's a Greek adaptation or not, he is creating an experience that is just uniquely his own, but that still finds ways to bring in, I think, a broader audience, right? Mm-hmm. He talks about the fact like he likes to write plays that are broken, that are not finished, that have rough edges, because that's feels like his life, and that feels like the world that we live in. And I think that's like he really does capture something about that, right? Like it's hard to read his plays, I feel like on page, but like having seen a bunch of them produced, you like it's that thing like where you feel, I don't know, like you feel like you're in a world that you feel like you're in the world that you live in, and it's that same thing of like emotional truth versus factual truth, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He could just write a play like IPHIGENIA 2.0, for instance, was written during the two different wars of George W. Bush's presidency, and he could have just written a play about the war in Iraq, but he didn't. He wrote this play about this family dealing with this very particular moment. He wrote about, he changes out the chorus from the original play. The original play is a chorus of women who have come to see all the gathered Greek forces. He changes them out for essentially a chorus of soldiers and a chorus of bridesmaids. Mm-hmm. And it's again, it's that way of sort of like how did, like, I don't know, he just the way that he picks and chooses the thing, like the pieces of text that he puts into his plays. He also describes his writing as essentially being collage work, right? He likes to sort of, he likes to tear up a bunch of different works that he loves and fit them together into a new thing. Yeah. And I think, and again, it sings, right? Like it is very much an original voice, and especially like, and it's an original voice that keeps getting seen, even though like a lot of like the American theater is dominated by writers who are writing naturalism, which is fine, but it is when you get those voices that are like very unique, I think they can, and unique, and it's like well fleshed out as Chuck's work is. I think it just it just pops immediately.
Yeah. More specifically, if you could give just a taste of what, how would you describe IPHIGENIA 2.0 to someone who has not seen or read it before?
Oh God! I mean, so I saw the world premiere production that Tina Landau directed at Signature Theater.
Wow, I'm very jealous.
Yeah, no, and it was, I mean, so you had Tom Nellis as Agamemnon. If you know Tom at all, he's incredible. Kate Mulgrew played Clytemnestra. So first of all, you had this just incredible cast, and then you had like Tina's style of directing, which is just like throw everything out. And how do you describe it? I mean, it is both like, it is both like completely confounding sometimes. Like there's a lot of times where there is material flying at you and you don't know what's going on, and you may not understand what you're experiencing at the time. And then but then I feel like later you do hit it, right? I feel like Chuck's plays are like the kind of artwork that like you go to and you maybe see in a museum, and you sort of maybe find yourself sitting there staring at the wall for like whatever the painting or the sculpture, whatever, for a long time, and you don't know why, and then you leave later, and it hits you, and then you go back, and I feel like when you go back, you probably have a completely new experience to it. When I prepping for this, like when you first asked me, I was like, oh, okay, it's got to be something. It should be something Greek because that's me. But but like all the Greek translations that are available for free online, they suck. A lot of them are just like old, or they're just old and like they're written in a very old, stodgy style, and you kind of it's like, oh, this feels like bad Shakespeare, And so I started thinking, oh well, all of Chuck's plays are available for free online, and so like that seems like something that I want to do, but I was like, but then which play? And so I actually had to read through some of which I had not read in ages. And it was interesting, like for me anyways, as I came into them, like, oh God, I completely missed this thing before, right? Or you get to the thing that I was looking forward to, and it fulfills like all those old, memories, whatever. But at the same time, then you find another thing about it, like, oh, I didn't realize that, or whatever, Drawing connections between his work is also really interesting, so I feel like there are pieces of, because there are various pieces of text that he will get really interested in, and he will end up including them in different plays.
Or certain rituals. I mean, there's a massive wedding that ends in entropy in this play, as there is in Big Love, and interesting even to track the similarities and differences in the way that those rituals are described. Should also be mentioned with IPHIGENIA 2.0 that it is at least loosely inspired by IPHIGENIA Aulis in the Greek tragedy, in which the high Greek king Agamemnon is about to lead his soldiers off to the Trojan War, but is told by the gods that the only way he can do so is by sacrificing his beloved favorite daughter, Iphigenia. So that is just a taste of the fun Greek stuff.
Yeah, I mean, but it's interesting too. Like especially as I've been looking back at Chuck's play on this, and I also, just because I'm a nerd, I had to reread the Euripides version as well.
Oh, you're such a nerd.
I mean, also like I am working on my own version of a story that includes a bit of Iphigenia's story as well. So like there's a lot going on. It's all coming together. But no, it was interesting to me too. I've never actually had the opportunity to sit down with Chuck and really talk to him about his process, but I could see what he was doing with his version of the play, and how it both relates to, it also diverges from the source text. And I think it was so fascinating. For instance, in the original play, it's like basically they're stuck at Aulis because there is no wind, right? Like the sea is becalmed, they can't get across the sea to Troy. And then this prophet Calchas comes forward and he's like, you must sacrifice, your daughter Agamemnon, or this will never happen. And he gets rid of that completely. He gets rid of Calchas, he gets rid of the becalming business, and he forces the characters there to like, he takes it out of the gods' hands and puts it into the humans' hands. Mm-hmm. Like in his play, it's like the soldiers are like, we're not going to war with you. We are not following you across the sea and putting our lives on the line if we don't know that you are willing to do the same. Mm-hmm. Like you have to show us, you have to prove to us that this is worth it. And the only way you can do that is by killing something that you love. And it is this really sort of that is, because I think that is a thing that a contemporary audience has a hard time with, in terms, it's hard for us to to really get into this idea, particularly this Greek idea of fate, and of giving over completely to to the God's will, and that there's nothing you can do to change that. So it's like all those ways in which we find to bring those stories into the human hands. I think that is what that's what Chuck does. And I think that's actually a lot of what I do as well. And I think that's another reason that I've really responded to his work. It's because he finds just so many wonderful ways to make us sit in our current moment via these ancient stories, and allows us, creates these experiences where we are able to just fully live in it, right? And live with all of its complexities, and all live with the high joy, and also the grand tragedy, and then these just ecstatic moments of destruction. I always think of the moment in Big Love where as he's described it, they take out their wedding gifts and start smashing them against the wall, and like there's a moment like that where like in IPHIGENIA 2.0 as well, where like it's like we're going to just destroy things. I mean, what does it call, like it turns into a riot, murder, war party, or
Right,
something.
murder war party. Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
As they throw pink champagne at the wall. It's a wild play.
Yeah, you're throwing pink champagne. Yeah, like it's this crazy moment, and in the middle of it, and I remember watching that, like seeing that moment, and it just feels, you feel yourself getting swept up into this thing. It's like it's like, oh God, yeah, like there's this, like it's this, you too kind of like I too wanted to be a part of that destructive force. And then Agamemnon comes out carrying like his dead daughter, you know, like covered in blood. Mm-hmm. And then the play is just boom, over. And you're like, it's that thing of like, yeah, because like it is a play about violence and about where violence comes from, and how all violence ultimately comes from within us. And what does that mean to, like, what does it mean to live with that, and how do we move past that, or how do we I don't know, embrace that, and also find ways to check that, you know?
Folks, we've got about, I'm going to ask Tim about 5 more minutes of questions, but in the meantime, you're welcome to start putting your questions into the live chat box in your windows, and we would be more than happy to answer those in about 5 minutes. They're starting to come in already. Tim, I'm curious to hear from you. What was it, when did you first encounter Chuck Mee's work, and what was that like, given how your preoccupations seem to intersect?
Yeah, it was first my dear friend Andrea, who introduced me to Chuck's work and to the City Company's work at the same time, was via Bob Rauschenberg America. So City Company is of course Anne Bogart's company, and they have a long history of working with Chuck. And he created a piece about the visual artist Bob Rauschenberg, that is this, you know, Rauschenberg's sculptures, like his whole method was like basically like he would like leave his studio in New York and walk around the block, and anything he found on the street on the street that inspired him, he would pick it up and he would take it home and build a sculpture out of it. And so they decided Chuck wrote a play, I think, in that style, basically like just sort of all these different pieces of Americana and just like themes that were interesting to them. And so I got to see the premiere actually of that at Actors Theater of Louisville during the Humana Festival. And it was definitely one of those plays where I was like, I don't know what the fuck I just saw. I was also sick. I was also like coming down with a fever at the time. So I was trying desperately not to like, you know, like die, I guess, or shiver or whatever. Like I felt terrible. But I was like, I don't really know what I'm seeing, but I know there's something in here that is really electric and exciting to me. And again, like that was a play that I got to see different iterations of later on. It was a show that City Company toured around, and each time I saw it, you know, it could bring something back to me. Though I would say that the first of his Greek plays that also just like really just kind of like knocked my socks off was his Orestes 2.0, which is just a crazy, crazy play. That's based on a crazy, crazy play. It's not one that's often produced because most people, I think, look at this and go like, this play is too crazy. Both the original and Chuck's play. So, but it was this thing. It was like, it constantly kept me on my toes. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know where it's coming from, but I love what's going on here. And there's a story here that he's described, like that he's creating, that is really fascinating to me. Again, like about like, you know, I think, you know, the sources of human violence and stuff like that. But it was, yeah, I mean, that was my first experience of it, and it was like, yeah, I was like, I have to see this on stage.
Something else I'm curious to hear from you. You know, we've been asking playwrights specifically to pick plays that have sustained and inspired them. So they're, of course, revisit, you know, where I'm talking with people about works that they care deeply about and that they're revisiting. Revisiting IPHIGENIA 2.0 right now, did new things come to the fore for you that you hadn't seen before, but that felt relevant to this moment, or felt resonated differently with you? Yeah.
Like I think the Agamemnon speech at the opening of the play is just, it is so like it is so insane to kind of come back to that. Like, and for one thing, like I can still hear Tom Nellis's voice saying, like, reciting that speech, even though this was 2007. You know, like it was a while ago. but like it is this moment of a man who is just in this complete moment of crisis and not knowing what is the right way forward. You know, I think that's really interesting. I also think like the way like the choral bits, because like the chorus, like the Greek, like the traditional Greek chorus was always about like representing the populace, right? These are these big stories about kings and gods and heroes and stuff, but the chorus is always a chorus of the people, more or less. Yeah. And it's the way for the playwrights to bring the people onto the stage, and that's one of the things that I think just like that the chorus in IPHIGENIA just does so well, is that it brings these people onto the stage, and you see them surrounded by a world in chaos, a world that's, you know, like brimming with violence, and unable to really process it. So like the ways in which they just like they'll go off onto tangents, like the bridesmaids will go off on tangents talking about other bridal showers that they've been to, like the things that sold, like Chuck loves his lists, right? Like here's a list of things that soldiers love, you know, like, and like, but it is the way that then that it is able to both tell the story of the moment and explore the themes of the play, while also just like making you feel like, you know, I don't know, like it is this everyday sort of thing, and like and making it real and identifiable, I think, for a contemporary audience.
Yeah. Before we turn to some questions, one last question I have for you about Chuck Mee in general. You know, he's also really well known in the theater community for his flexibility and openness regarding his scripts and his plays.
Yeah.
He makes them all available publicly, and then he says more or less in productions, you know, change what you want, do what you want with these, make these yours. And I wonder if that's also the kind of imagination and flexibility that we were talking a little bit about at the beginning of this, in terms of what theater artists are going to need to do in order to make theater for the times in which we're living. I wonder if it is that flexibility and capaciousness of imagination that Chuck has been modeling for us for decades.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I love that. I love that too. It's like it comes out of. He talks about it coming out of the spirit of the fact that like that no story that's ever been told in Western theater in particular has been original, right? Like, you know, like Shakespeare was copying from so and so, was copying from so and so, you know, and so like that's, and so his the way he describes it in his work is like I feel free to like to take my text and subsequently cut it up and use it, turn it into your own things, right? I think it's only if you want to do the play exactly as he's written, then he asks you to, you know, to go through the traditional channels of royalties and rights and stuff like that. But yeah, like I think that there is something that is interesting about that, and it's actually it's a way that I would love to work more often, but we don't get the opportunity to in the American theater, because it's everything, like everything is about like, you know, time and money and capital, and like we don't have enough time to do all the work we're going to do in this play, right? So the script has to be ready to go, and we can't take time to sort of cut it up and bring in new elements or whatever. There's just not a lot. There's not like a big tradition of sort of group collaboration, unless you have like very specific companies, like say Rachel's company, The Team, or, you know, or City Company, like who actually can take the time who found ways to make the time, I guess, to create these more collaborative things. And I think like that would be a fantastic way going forward. And actually it's been one of the exciting things about the Homebound project, like for me anyways, like being able to like to do my own thing, but while also like being in conversation with these other writers. Like it's like not any single one of us is telling the whole story of these characters, and so that's been. I think there's like there's real possibility there as people think about.
Speaking of time, let's get to
questions.
I could talk with you about Greek tragedy all night. We've got one here. What is it about the work of the Greeks that speaks to you and the specific worlds you create?
I like a little blood and violence, so there's always some of that, you know. Like, no, I mean it is these big themes, and like there's something about the fact that like that in like the stories that were being told in the Greek theater are based on this mythology of which acknowledges a time where the humans and the gods, you know, lived alongside one another. And what does it mean now, like that we're living in a present where the gods aren't there to sort of to punish us directly or to hold our hands and point the right way, And yeah, so like I think I don't know, like that really speaks to me, because I feel like we're in this moment where, you know, like where we don't know what to do, and we are like, we're, you know, we're struggling and scrambling to figure out like the way forward.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something about that eternal human struggle to figure out, like, you know, how the hell do we get through this particular moment, that I think I take from the Greeks that continues to speak to me.
Thank you. All right, another question from someone with a little bit of inside information into the future of We Declare You a Terrorist. Roundhouse's production of We Declare You a Terrorist is going to feature film elements. When writing, how much do you picture in the final production versus how much do you leave to the creative team?
Generally speaking, when I'm thinking about my plays, or when I'm writing the play, I'm actually really envisioning it very realistically, like almost cinematically in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I never expect them to be produced that way. I never want them to be produced that way. And I really love what I love. Like, one of the things I think that I stick with theater, and will probably always stick with theater, at least in this regard, is I love the fact that other people come in with these different ideas about how to do, like, actually how to make the thing happen. They bring like different, like, between the designers and the actors and the director, the stage manager, even, you know, like everyone brings something to the table that I didn't necessarily think of, you know, when I was writing it, and that's a thing that I genuinely love about it. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. We've got a question from Roundhouse Theater, which means our wonderful tech support Johnny Monday, and it's a doozy. Given the information age's deluge of images of human misery, does theater offer a privileged view into trauma, war, and violence? Does it offer a way out of those problems? And is there such a thing as anti-war spectacle or art?
I feel like this question is above my pay grade. I mean, yes. I guess like when theater is dealing with issues of violence and of war, obviously, like, it's coming from a point of privilege, right? Because generally speaking, a theater audience is not in the middle of like, you know, like a war. But I think it's not. It really depends on sort of what you're going for, right? I mean, I feel like we talk, you know, to really go like deep into classical drama, right? Like the Romans, like, they put all their violence on stage, and the Greeks kept it all off stage. And I think that is, so to bring that into the contemporary period, like if you were putting violence on stage just because, you know, like, you just want to tap into that human lizard brain, you know, like that more primal part of us that actually kind of craves violence. If you're just like trying to tap into that and make a buck off it, then yeah, maybe that's not, you know, the most productive thing. I don't want to get all judgy, but, you know, like, but it is, like, whatever, like, but that is one thing, right? As opposed to, I think, when you were writing about something after the fact, and you're trying to, I think, when you're trying to understand it and tap into it, and, you know, like, again, like, trying to like pull it apart and figure out, like, how did we get here? Like how did this moment of atrocity happen, and how can we, what are the lessons we can learn from that and move on from it with, you know? I mean, like, at least that's how I think of it, right? Like, I'm not there to try and like re-traumatize anyone. I'm there to, like, generally speaking, I feel like I'm trying to draw that bridge between some sort of past and a future, where we kind of come to some kind of understanding of what's going on. And the Greeks couldn't do it, and Shakespeare couldn't do it, so I'm sure I won't either, but hopefully I'll pass on the torch to whoever.
Yep, I think that question was exactly at your pay grade, because that was
okay,
a good answer. We're actually at that time, and so it's just about time to say good night to you and to our audience. But thank you so much. It's been such a joy to get to speak to you. And I can't wait for Homebound for your episode.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tim J. Lord. Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Playwrights on Plays. If you'd like to read IPHIGENIA 2.0, you can do so online for free at the link that we're providing. This series will continue weekly on Thursdays at 7 p.m. And next, I'm so excited to welcome Aaron Posner to discuss George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. Thank you to our tech support and sometime question asker, Johnny Monday, our composer, Matt Nielsen, the Roundhouse Theater Marketing Department. And in the meantime, I encourage you to check out Roundhouse's website for additional digital content, especially Homebound, our web series about life in the nation's capital during a pandemic. Finally, if you are financially able, please consider a donation to the Roundhouse Theater Resilience Fund. Your contribution will be matched dollar for dollar by our dedicated and generous Board of Trustees, and they have extended that match to up to $200,000, meaning that a gift now will impact RHT more than ever before. Be well, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week.